with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. So, Rich, the money that's being talked about by this administration, it's mind-boggling. It's just too much to comprehend. I think Senator Lindsey Graham, from the great state of South Carolina, said it best. He says that that Joe Biden is completely off the rails here, and he's making Barack Obama look like Ronald Reagan. You know. And Barack Obama,
that is an amazing statement.
That's an amazing statement. You know,
Absolutely.
I just had to pause for a second to kind of comprehend that. But Barack Obama as Ronald Reagan, as in other words, being a fiscal conservative, but really, I mean, Joe Biden, he's off the rails here. I mean, the money that's being talked about, I mean, it's just like trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. I mean, where's it going to come from? I don't think it matters where it comes from.
Well, I think the first thing he wants to do is, look over to Bernie Sanders, because Bernie's loving this right now. And Bernie's like a soporific. You look at him and you want to go to sleep. For that matter, Biden did go to sleep. But the point of the matter is, this is really a payoff to and an acknowledgement of the far left progressive unit, which is now turning into the entire Democratic Party. But it is absolutely that. And he's going to go down a path that's good. It's the biggest grab for power in modern times. The tax bill that he's trying to put through right now is the largest increase in taxes practically in the history of the United States. The consequences of what he's going to be doing, if it were to get through, which, it could very well do that. And we'll discuss how that could happen later. But the consequences are dire for us. We can't afford it. And I think going down the road, we're going to be we have such debt going down the road that we're going to be wiping out the possibility of a GDP, because the debt will be more than the GDP.
Well, there's just so much currency right now that's awash in this market. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how you prevent inflation. Right now you don't. So much money chasing so few assets and so few commodities. Everything is getting bid up right now. I mean, look at home prices. Look at just so many things that we depend on. Look at appliances. Look at home goods. Anything. The whole supply chain is out of control right now with price increases. And who ultimately pays for that? Of course, the American consumer pays for that.
Everyone listening right now is going to pay for that.
Let me tell you, we're going to get into a period of hyperinflation with all this currency, and still it's still not even close to being done if Biden gets his way. Let's bring in our first guest. We're very, very pleased to have with us Sean Higgins from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's been with us before, and he's with us right now. Sean, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So, talk a little bit about all of this currency that's being created. And we're gonna increase taxes and we're gonna pay for all this stuff, but that's never gonna happen. I mean, we're just on such a tear here of spending money. I mean, all the stimulus money that's been spent, and during the Trump period, and now during the Biden administration, and he's just getting started. Is there a huge risk of having this much currency hit the market at the same time? I mean, it's more currency means it's worth less, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more you currency is sort of like a resource, like other things. The more you flood a place with it, I mean, just the lower the value is. So that's a concern. I mean, apparently, according to some reports, some of the initial news editorial stuff that came in when Biden just got elected and was proposing stuff, started saying he was bolder than Barack Obama. And apparently that really went to his head, according to some reports, and he's enamored with this idea of being seen as a bigger, more transformative president than Barack Obama, which goes to your sort of earlier point about Obama being practically Reagan compared to Biden, and that appears to be a very sort of deliberate effort on the part of the current president.
Well, you have to, Sean, this is Rich. You have to think, what is the driving force behind this? Because we're not dealing with totally ignorant people. I mean, granted, President Biden may be having a cognitive problem, but we're dealing with a lot of other people. Then everyone, if you understand economics, the downside to this is outrageous. So what is the net result? What is really wanted? Because there's a reason this is happening.
Is it because that this is the way to pay off the electorate in the next election?
Well, if you said unions, I would say that. Because I think it's the biggest payoff to those guys.
Everybody. Hey, look, if you don't vote us back into government, you're going to lose all of this stuff.
Well, I don't think
all these freebies.
I don't think you can discount the influence that Bernie Sanders has had on the current administration and just on the Democratic Party in general. And this is a guy who's an avowed socialist. He just literally fundamentally rejects some of the basic ideas that a lot of economics and economists have. He doesn't see. He doesn't see any reason why the government just simply can't do all these things the way Biden is saying, and that the funding problem will just sort of take care of itself in some way somehow. It's baffling how they'll do it because the administration has not sorted out how it's going to pay for any of this stuff or most of this stuff. And as you guys rightly point out, we already have a massive amount of debt that's been racked up just as a consequence of the payments that went out during the COVID crisis. I thought that was the thing that was going to be sort of driving the policy for the next couple of years after that. So how do we pay for all the money we spent trying to keep keeping the lights going on while the COVID crisis was on? But that's already sort of blown past that and into these sort of transformative ideas about completely changing the whole nature of the government and the economics, and that comes from people like Sanders and other people who just sort of reject these notions and claim that that the stuff has been wrong all along. I don't know if you're familiar with, or you may have heard the term, but the socialists love the phrase like late-stage capitalism. They sort of believe that capitalism is already in a situation of crumbling, and they just need to step in and replace it with the proper system. And that's sort of what they're doing.
Well,
that's scary.
Well, yeah, but I think by being on the road, using the words, and they're very conscious of words because they redefine them every week. But this is the wealth will pay. That creates a wealth or a class warfare, which is a good way of splitting this country again even more. That plays into the hand of what we're seeing happening in this chaos of how we're going to be able to pay for all of this, and what's the reality here in terms of capitalism. And what I'm hearing now, we're starting to hear the same verbiage that we had with the Obama administration. You didn't pay for that. Neil, you and I are entrepreneurs. You didn't pay. Neil, you didn't build this big company because, you did it. Everyone else did it. But not you. You didn't suffer along the way. I didn't build my company for the last 35, 40 years because I didn't do that. I didn't suffer along the way. Someone else did. Now they're saying, Sean, I got to tell you, this is the 2021 version. Wall Street didn't build that. That's a great comment. That's going to encourage people to really invest in Wall Street and invest in corporations and be part of what's that system called? That's right, capitalism. So this is really a predetermined conversation.
Well, just to answer your point, I'm not aware of Wall Street ever claiming to have built anything. They've always said that we're the financiers, we're the ones who put the money forward for other people to do this type of stuff. They're not. It's just a false sort of dichotomy because it's saying they didn't do something that they never said they did in the first place.
Well, you know what it does, though, Sean? In a way, it vilifies the large corporations, and I think that's why they're using that verbiage as opposed to saying you didn't build it. Yeah, we know the corporations didn't, but people invest in those corporations because they like the widgets that they build or the land that they buy or the planes that they create. But again, it vilifies the concept of bad corporation. Go in the corner. You're a bad corporation. You're making lots of money, and the average Joe working there is not. That's what it comes down to, I think.
Mm. Yeah, and well, basically they hate them for making money in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of angry stuff directed at Amazon during the COVID crisis because it was the one company that was in business and going sort of gangbusters during that period of time. But the reason why that was the case was because it was the one company that was consistently supplying stuff to people that they needed during crisis. I mean, would you have expected them not to do that? The thing that you can't overstate the fact that sometimes people just don't think these things through.
And it's a very, very good point. So, do they have any shot at raising the taxes that they need in order to pay for this? I mean, where are the battle lines being drawn there? I mean, can they get all the Democrats lined up behind this?
They might be able to. I mean, the thing is, there's only a small number of holdouts on most of these sort of issues for particular reasons. For example, on the PRO Act, there's which is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which is the big pro-labor administration thing. There were 4 holdouts. Then they basically got Joe Manchin of West Virginia to change his mind for whatever reason. And so now it's down to 2 senators from Arizona and Mark Warner of Virginia. Warner is opposed to it, I believe, because Virginia is a right-to-work state and has been for a long time, in the business community in there is very adamant about it staying that way, and he's sort of reflecting that part. But he's under a lot of pressure to cave on this. I believe the others are too. And when there's just that few people standing in the way, I mean, the pressure on them to conform becomes intense. I mean, you may remember during the Affordable Care Act, one congressman from Michigan, Bart Stupak, kind of held up the whole thing because he was pro-life, and despite being otherwise a liberal Democrat, he objected to some provisions in there, and literally the entire weight of the liberal movement sort of started vilifying him for this, and he eventually caved too. So it could happen. I mean, the margins are thin, but the ability to pressure them is there.
Hey, folks, we're with Sean Higgins from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We're going to talk about payroll taxes next. And are they going up? Are you paying for it? Every worker in America paying more payroll taxes to pay for the infrastructure dreams of Biden, which is really not infrastructure. A lot of other pork in there, everything but infrastructure. Let's get that right. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're together with Sean Higgins from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. So, Sean, we got to get to payroll taxes. I mean, you wrote a great piece on this. Is Biden planning new payroll taxes to pay for his infrastructure program? What is it, $1.8 trillion, of which I think only $600 billion, and that's a B still, has anything to do with infrastructure. Everything else but infrastructure bill. But, Sean, just, it is very scary that the margin is so close in the Senate and that this agenda could get through with zero Republican support. But it would have to go through a filibuster, but they would just vote to get rid of the filibuster in particular cases, right? Not to get rid of it all together, but say, well, for labor issues, we don't need a filibuster anymore. Or for passing the infrastructure bill, we don't need a filibuster anymore. And all they need is then 50 plus the vice president.
Well, Schumer said they're going to do that. He said that's going to be the route. We'll do it without them, we'll do it with them, but we're prepared to do it without them. No, there is no reaching across the aisle. I mean, to me, that's just a myth.
So this would have to, but they would have to trash the filibuster, right? Right, Sean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one thing I think a lot of people don't sort of realize is the extent to which the Senate's rules are based on just sort of tradition, and this is the way we've always done it. They actually have a lot of leeway in terms of how the rules are set up, and they can just simply be changed. I mean, for a long time, the filibuster required somebody to continue to speak, and a filibuster in the literal dictionary sense of just somebody not refusing to yield the ground. And then they changed it to Well, you just need to have people say they're not supporting something, and that's a filibuster, and they don't have to be present on the floor of the Senate. That they made that change in the 70s. They could change it back to the previous way it was. They can get rid of it altogether. I mean, the thing that's prevented them from doing this in the past is the fact that the Senate flips from one side to the other. So most senators, and senators typically have longer careers than congressmen, so a lot of them have been there at one time or another when one party or the other had the majority, and they know what it's like to be in the minority. So they don't want to undermine their ability when they're in the majority, when they're in the minority, or if they ever become the minority again, to block something. But that mindset seems to be changing now. A lot of the sort of old guard people in the Senate who prevented a lot of these changes in the past are gone. So, yeah, I mean, the rules could simply change.
Wow, scary stuff. Very scary. We got to stay on top of that. So the piece that you wrote is Biden planning new payroll taxes. And, of course, there's been a lot of fanfare about the infrastructure bill. And you wrote a very interesting piece saying in order to pay for this, payroll taxes are on the table. And that means that everybody who works is actually paying the tax that would pay for, well, ostensibly pay for the infrastructure bill, which is not really an infrastructure bill. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, no, I should clarify. The administration has literally just not said how they're going to pay for this family leave part in the payroll in the current proposal, but it's based on something that Senator Gillibrand and Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut have proposed, rather transparently, to basic. And the way they propose to pay for it is to add a additional payroll tax that both businesses and workers would pay to be able to provide this family leave. I mean, the difference between the White House and when you propose legislation is you do have to say how you're going to pay for the legislation in the bill you propose. So they've had to do this. The administration hasn't had to do it yet. But that's how they propose to do it. And the administration has not said that they would do this, but they haven't specifically ruled it out. They haven't actually talked about it much. And they're going to have to figure out some way to pay for all this stuff, just simply for Senate legislative procedural reasons. So they would have to do something. And this is the way this particular proposal, this particular part in the Biden administration proposal is paid for by the people who would actually run the legislation through the Senate. So maybe it will change. Maybe they'll do something differently. They're claiming that they can do this all through, just a tax on the absolute wealthiest people. I don't buy that at all. There's really not that much. There's actually not that much money from the wealthiest people that you can get from them, unless you just get utterly confiscatory rates, in which case you give them an incentive to relocate out of the country. I mean, the very rich people have the resources to do that. Ultimately, anything the government spends either has to be paid for or it's debt that has to be financed, which also has to be paid for. So people pay for the stuff one way or the other.
Well, and you're right. And if we were to go through with what we're discussing right now for the last 10 minutes, is that we create such chaos in the marketplace for jobs. Because ultimately what happens, Neil, when you raise taxes, what happens when corporations have to pay more to produce their product and so forth? Don't they cut back on people, cut back on hours, cut back on wages the best they can? Except this time around, they have a bunch of crazy far-left progressives who will never let them cut back on wages. So I just see utter chaos in this whole thing, that the average Jane and Joe are really going to get hurt.
Or they move their jobs overseas.
Well, that's getting hurt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Sean, you got the last word.
Yeah, I mean, well, my last word will be I agree with what you guys just said, and you summed it up pretty accurately. When this happens, businesses do things exactly like what you just described.
Sean, thanks for being on the show. Sean Higgins from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a very, very important topic. We really got to watch where this goes. Thanks for being with us, Sean.
Thank you.
Coming up, we have Grover Norquist, the president of Americans for Tax Reform, and we're going to talk about Biden's proposal on capital gains taxes. A very, very important topic because most of that money gets reinvested in companies that buy things, that create jobs, that create the wealth of this country, the prosperity of this country, and the security of this country. We are really, really playing with fire here, folks. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruff. And Rich, man, it is a real pleasure to introduce our next guest to carry on our conversation about taxes, and more taxes. We're very pleased to have on with us the man himself, Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, welcome back to Made in America.
Good to be with you.
Grover, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. And, I've built a number of companies. I buy businesses. And, on paper, people might say that I've done pretty well financially. But many times I don't feel like I got 2 nickels in my pocket. That's because everything I have, everything I got, I reinvest back into my businesses. If I sell something, I take that and I invest it in another business. I buy things like machinery. I'm an American manufacturer. Technology. I mean, there's just so much to keep current right now that an entrepreneur has to do. That's just sucking up every bit of financial resource that I can find. And it's not like we just take this money and go have fun with it. No, we go and we create more growth for our business, which means we create jobs. So when you talk about the capital gains tax, in using the capital gains tax to pay for all these socialist dreams, these boondoggles, these wild goose chases that we're talking about right now. In the fundamental thing that the entrepreneur has is the ability to readjust his portfolio, take one asset, liquefy it, and put it into something else. And if you take that away from the entrepreneur, you're playing with fire. I mean, this whole thing is going to crumble, and it's so sad. And I'm just so worked up about it. What can you tell us? What is your view on the capital gains tax?
Well, here's the reason to be a little more cheerful than in previous crises. And that is that Biden is an old man. And when he gave a speech in Scranton during this last election, 2020, he set out to this audience. Now, people are talking about how the stock market's going up, but none of you guys own any stock. And people were out in cars, this is COVID and stuff. Nobody was able to talk back to him. So he didn't hear back, but he was talking to people where when he was growing up, 10% of Americans own stock directly. But today, 53% of Americans have a 401k or an IRA or both. So you're talking, it's 53% of families. So the level of understanding that the capital gains tax affects everyone, that the corporate income tax affects everybody with a 401k or an IRA. This is much greater than, say, in the 1960s, when there were no 401ks or IRAs. And there was some wonderful polling data that Scott Rasmussen's group did, maybe 20 years ago, where they pointed out that if you owned $5,000 worth of stock, not $1 jillion, $5,000 or more of stock, it made you 10% more Republican and less Democrat. And you could actually trace the growth of the modern Republican Party 1960 into 1980s just with the growth of stock. That can explain all of it, interestingly. So when Biden gets up and says, I'm not throwing a rock at you, and then he says, I'm raising the corporate rate, which will make the value of everything in your 401k worthless. But I'm going to raise the capital gains tax, which means, and by the way, when you decide to sell stuff, we're going to get you. People are not going to react well. Biden polls at 52%, which the press was going, that's pretty impressive. But other people pointed out at the same time, Obama was at 60, Clinton was at 56. Biden's at 52. The only person in the last 40 years who did worse than Obama was Trump, and he had been trashed by the establishment press for a year prior to getting a less good approval rating of 52. So Biden's approval rating is not good historically compared to other presidents in 100 days, and his tax and spend policies are more radical than what was put forward by Biden, by Obama and Clinton, and they lost the House of Representatives the next year after they did that.
Well, that's
fascinating commentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating commentary.
Exactly. And you're right. I mean, one, we have a much more educated population.
I feel better now.
Neil's smiling. I'm wondering, he walked in pretty dour this afternoon into the studio. Now he's smiling.
For the last week and a half. Now I feel good now. It's going to be a good weekend.
He's sending Grover a check, that's for sure. So, but in all honesty, we have a much more informed society. I think Grover's 100% correct on that. And it does not play out well in the polls, and I don't know if I believe the 52%, with Biden right now. And I think you're 100% correct. I think Trump would have done better if they didn't beat on him every day, 18 times a day. So, but I think when we come back, when you're on the other side of the break, I want to have this conversation because what you're really playing with, and I'm an investor, I create companies, 10 of them, and I need angel investors when I do my corporations. And who are the investors for the corporations? They're incredibly wealthy people who look for these opportunities and who are playing with, if they have a very high tax rate and they can't have, what they're doing in terms of the capital gains tax, they're not going to be there for you. So ultimately, you look down the road, you're eliminating the road.
Robert, before we got to take a break, we just got a few moments left. But before we get to the other side, do the Democrats in the Senate know what you know about history and 53% of people owning stock and capital gains is going to impact like everybody, a very big portion of our country. So much is dependent on those investment funds and so forth. Will Biden get Democrat support, or will a number break off from this?
I think there'll be some Democrats in the Senate who might want to pull some of these numbers down. Biden originally wanted a 35% corporate rate, getting rid of everything that Trump had done and the Republicans. Then he says 20. Then his staff said 28. Now some of the senators are saying 25 is as high as it's going to go. That's still very damaging because you have to add state and local corporate income taxes to that. So we'll be at 30% all in compared to China, communist China at 25, the Europeans at 23.5. There's no reason to raise the tax at all. It only will hurt us in terms of competition. But do the Democrats understand it? I think a few of them do, but others will be yelled at by enough people that they want to show that they didn't just go along with everything Bernie Sanders wanted. So maybe the two guys from Virginia who have to pretend to be moderates might pull back some of the capital gains. I think we need to yell loud enough to reduce the damage as much as we can, recognizing that the Democrats have a majority in the House and the Senate. They will pass a bill. It will be stupid and destructive.
Grover, we got to take a quick break. Folks, we're with Grover Norquist, president of the Americans for Tax Reform. We'll all be back together again in a few moments to have more discussion around this very, very important topic.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, I remember the last time that you're on the show, we're talking about this 50-50 Senate, and we talked about Senator Manchin, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. And you felt that no matter what, he's still a Democrat and he'll still cave on the pressure from the Democrat Party. Since then, I see that Biden has given Joe's wife a very, very nice job. And so obviously they're working him very, very hard. So when you talk about, getting the infrastructure bill through, you're getting the tax, corporate taxes, the capital gains tax, and all of the, the new tax rates through Congress. You talk about the family act of what he's trying to do, another couple of $1 trillion, and you add that all up. I mean, is Joe Manchin still reliable to backstop this, or will they have enough pressure on him to give in to these socialist dreams?
Well, our friend Manchin is not a moderate. He's a Democrat from West Virginia. He endorsed the PRO Act, which would abolish right to work in 27 states, including West Virginia, his own state. It would ban independent contractors, and there are 50 million Americans who are independent contractors in some part of their economic lives. It's a huge piece of the economy. So he's not a moderate, but he has stated and restated since we last spoke. He wrote an article in the Washington Post which said that he would never support abolishing or even altering the filibuster. Now, one of the things we all feared, I certainly feared, and others did as well, is that they would go to Sinema, the Democrat senator
from Arizona,
and Manchin, and say, look, rather than, let's say we don't abolish it, but we'll just alter it so people have to talk for 20 hours and then we vote, right? Instead of stop requiring 60 votes. Did they do something that sounded different than abolishing it? And maybe could you tell people that you kept your word if you did that? Well, Manchin wrote this piece for the Washington Post saying, I won't alter it, I won't get rid of it. And Sinema did something very similar, being challenged by a left-wing mob in Arizona. She doubled down and said, guys, I'm not doing that. So both of them have made it clear they don't intend to. I think that they can keep their word and say, as long as there's no elimination of the filibuster, then you cannot change election law and you cannot change labor law. Those are the two things that Democrats who realize how unpopular these tax and spending proposals are, they're willing to vote for the tax and spending proposals, but they would really like the protection of knowing that they've changed election law to the point where they can't ever lose an election because they will be able to gerrymander the whole country out of Washington, D.C., where they can add states willy-nilly and put Quebec and other places and give them 2 Senate votes. And so I feel more comfortable that we are protected against getting rid of the filibuster or even denting the filibuster. On particular tax issues, I think there are a number of Democrats who might say, capital gains at 39.5 or 43.4 is too high, take it down a bit. So we may see some effort so that people that can then dance around and say, see, they only cut off 4 of your fingers and they wanted 5 and I saved you. I don't know how much that will help, but to the extent that we can make the damage less, we're going to have to rebuild after all this spending, this debt, tax increases. I'd rather rebuild from a partial devastation than total devastation.
In the time that we have left, which is about a minute and a half, we can't let Grover go without discussing this. Estate tax changes, Grover. I was watching you on Stuart Varney the other day. And I have to tell you, I watch him every day, and I love Stuart. I think he's marvelous. But I've never seen him look so concerned as I did when you were discussing the proposed changes that could wipe out millions of small business, and particularly real estate and farms and so forth. He was very concerned, Grover. Can you just discuss that in about 30 seconds so people understand the direness of that?
Sure. Biden wants to eliminate the step-up in basis. So when you inherit land, a small business, a home, a farm, you would have to pay the taxes, the accumulated taxes on capital gains, on all the capital gain that your parents had. And so maybe hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. You'd have to pay it the day your parents died. Not when you sold the farm, but immediately. It is a second level of death tax, and it is designed to destroy family businesses, period. And it's on purpose.
Wow. I mean, and this is something that is out there right now. I mean, in the form of is legislation being drafted on this?
Yep. And Biden voted for this back in 76. This bill, this was passed in 76. It was repealed in 80 by the Democrats themselves. The Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and Democratic President Carter repealed and rejected getting rid of the stepped-up basis. Why? Because it was so crazy. There was such opposition. It's so difficult to administer. And Biden, who saw it fail, wants to put it back in. He's just plagiarizing a bad idea.
Plagiarizing a bad idea. Oh, there you go. From the plagiarizer himself.
Play a very bad song is what they're going to play.
Hey, Grover, thanks for being on the show. Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. We can't wait until you join us again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Take it easy.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, I mean, what would be, the reason? I mean, if, like Grover was saying, this second death tax, you got a family farm. It's been in the business, at least, for your parents' generation, and they inherited from their parents. And
sure.
A lot of these farms have been there for many years, just like, what we have, in West Virginia. I mean, that land is who we are, as a family. I mean, it's just who we are. This is our legacy, and it will be there for generations. But I could see this would be absolutely devastating. I mean, so if a property has appreciated,
mm-hmm.
and let's be real. I mean, with all of this currency that's being created, prices are going up in everything. I mean, so the value of things doesn't mean in real dollars, it's going up, but in these faux dollars, these fake dollars that we're creating, values are going up.
Implied value.
And then, so some guy down the road sold, at this one of these crazy, ridiculous prices, and so therefore now your property's worth the same amount of money, and so a parent dies, it's being willed to the family, to the children, and now you have to pay taxes on the death of your parent. It's immediately due. Even though you still live there, or
That's right.
the farm has not been monetized.
That's right. Or they take the land.
There hasn't been a cash event or anything.
That's right.
I mean, what is the reason for that? What is the reason to do that?
Accumulation of power, a land grab. I mean, that's what happens in tyrannical environments. That's what happens. The very powerful, the very wealthy. I mean, you have to watch Robin Hood again. But the very powerful, the very wealthy will accumulate the wealth. I mean, here's a real two things that come to my mind, because one, when I went to Syracuse, I lived up in Camillus after my first year, and it's all farm country. So you have these farms, Neil. Everyone thinks, oh my God, big farm. No, this is not Archer Daniels Midland. These are just family farms you're talking about. They're 280 acres, 350 acres. All right. The people working them are farmers. They work day to day. They don't make a ton of money. The land is worth a lot of money. But it's only if you sold the land is there a value. They don't have all that money. They're not rich people. They're hardworking people of the soil. Another example, and I saw that all the time when I was a kid up in upstate New York. The other thing is, in real time, Joe Robbie used to own the Dolphins. He had Joe Robbie Stadium. You would think Joe Robbie has all this cake, all this money, and everything. But the point of the matter is, he didn't. And when when he died, and he was going to give that to his family in his inheritance, they couldn't afford it because they had to pay the taxes on it. This is before we changed the death taxes in the United States. And as a result of that, somebody else had to buy the stadium, and the Robbie family, lost the stadium. That's what can happen, and that's really sad. And how could you come up with the money? Let's say you gain the value of your home. You bought
it's on paper. It's not the money's not in the bank.
But it isn't on paper when you sell your house. It's real, and
when you sell it,
yeah.
But not when you inherit it.
But when you sell it at that time, you've got to pay the taxes on it, so you're losing all that money. It's going to come off the top. You all know that. We've bought and sold
but
homes.
at least there's money coming in to pay the taxes. I just have a really big problem with something that's being inherited. people, hey, look, they don't have the wealth to pay the taxes, but they want to keep the legacy of their family. Why not let them keep the legacy of their family? And then once there is a cash event, then the taxes should be due. I think that's fair. That's reasonable. That's the way it should be done. But apparently, according to Grover, that's not what Biden is trying to do with this death tax.
I know that.
But they got a shellacking, back in, I guess it was back in 1976 when this thing was passed. And then by 1980, the Democrats themselves repealed it.
Well, I think they're going to put themselves in a bind. I think they're going to put themselves in a box. And I think they're going to lose seats.
This midterm, I mean,
they're going to lose seats.
We're looking for a major shellacking here, if they don't change course.
Listen, what are we, 8 seats off?
And the other thing, well, in the House, I think it's even 6 seats.
Yeah, it's nothing.
It's 6 seats.
Yeah,
right?
it's a quickie. We can do this. Not so sure about the Senate.
And the other thing I just want to mention that really is got me concerned is crime. And how crime is coming back. I mean, how can you run a business? How can you create jobs? How can you raise a family when you've got all this crime happening? Because the way that some of our cities, the Democrat-run cities, and we know who they are, where they are, the police are leaving in droves. Who would want to be a police person in Minneapolis right now, or in Detroit, or Los Angeles, or Seattle, or New York, or Portland, or any of these places where they just totally turned their back on the people that are out there fighting and keeping them safe. I don't get it.
So the companies won't go there, and the companies that are there are going to leave.
So what kind of jobs?
They're going away.
You can't.
They're going to go away.
You can't create.
You
can't create prosperity when you can't walk down the street. Because
when your
afraid.
car gets stolen every other night. Can't do that. Not going to happen.
Or your children's not safe.
That's right. Or you have bad school. Do you want to go on with this? We can have a whole litany of things here.
Well, we'll have to carry on next week because unfortunately, Rich, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.